I'm curious about the way you think and why you're so passionate about sharing your message, speaking around the world, your company, your media, content you put out there, and why you think it's important for you to continue sharing the message the way you do.
Well, I think that there are certain eternal values that we've lost politically, but also just interpersonally. And so for me, the idea of building back up a social fabric where we actually have some values in common is really important. And politics is one means of discussing that. Politics is basically the stuff we fight about at the tip of the iceberg, but the stuff I actually like to discuss is the stuff below that. And that's why when I'm discussing ideas or debating in a college setting, for example, I'm much less interested in debating sort of the vagaries of what's going on in the White House and much more interested in sort of root issues as to how do we balance things like our desire for liberty and our desire for communal commitment and capacity. These are things where we actually have to have serious conversations about what matters to us so that we can reach any sort of conclusion or at least clarify where we stand on the issues. Because what you find usually is that there's just not a lot of clarity in political conversation. And so my job is to try and drill down and not only make as clear as possible what I'm saying, but also try and elicit from the person I'm talking to what is their root core position and what is there for me to disagree with or agree with.
First, when you're going into a debate or some type of conversation, how do you take away that judgment of the other person, or you try to eliminate that judgment of them onto you?
Well, I mean, both. I mean, so we all fail at this. So I try to, in my, myself, I try to say, okay, I'm going to assume this person isn't a bad person. And now I have to try and drill down on what it is that makes them tick. And for them, if somebody comes in with a preconception about me being a nasty, terrible human being, then my first move has to be pretty kind of harsh, which it has to be, you don't have any evidence I'm a bad person other than we disagree. And if that's your feeling, that I'm a bad person just because we disagree, then you are actually the person acting like a bad person. If you are suggesting that I'm evil or nasty or cruel simply because you heard someone one time say that I'm evil, nasty, or cruel without you examining my material, or you've examined my material and what you take away from that is that I'm poorly motivated, as opposed to we just have a fundamental disagreement on root issues, well then that's you attempting to avoid the conversation altogether. So that's the first step.
Yeah.
And then you can have the conversation. Maybe it doesn't go anywhere. Maybe it does go somewhere. But you're not going to know until you get out of the headspace where the other person is a Nazi. The biggest lesson he ever taught me is to take everybody you talk to seriously. So with my dad, there really is no gap. I mean, folks who know him, and a lot of folks where I work know my dad, they know that he treats everybody exactly the same. So he whether it's a member of his family or whether he's the kind of person where if you get in an elevator with my dad, he will have your entire life story by the time you get out of the elevator, and it doesn't matter. Yeah. Exactly, it doesn't matter if it's one floor. He'll be your best friend by the end of he has met so many people on airplane rides. That's how my dad is, but he was also like that with us as kids, meaning that if I had a question, he took it extremely seriously and tried to get the best answer. He always addressed me as though I were an adult when I was a kid, and he took that stuff very seriously. And so for me, that's always been the case, and I think that's one of the reasons why my show and the stuff that I do has particular appeal to young people, because I'm treating these ideas seriously and I'm not dumbing them down for young people. I think there's this perception, I mean, first of all, number one, I'm still relatively young, right? I'm only 34 still, but part of that is also in politics, people who think they know a lot about politics tend to think, okay, well, if I translate this into second grade level, then that's what people really need. They need me to dumb this stuff down to a level they can understand. I think people are capable of understanding a lot more than they think they're capable of understanding if they're treated with respect in how this stuff is presented. I've always been committed to the idea that we need to change how people think in order for them to change how they live. It's everything we've been talking about. Change the mindset from, why is the world being mean to me, to, okay, here's where the world is, now here's how I'm going to succeed, and here's why I should succeed. If you've got a problem, the proper order is that you first look within and see if you can solve it yourself, right? And this is my pet peeve with people I deal with in family, friends, society, is if a good piece of advice is given to you, do you ignore the advice? Do you fight against reality? Are you more angry at reality than you are willing to change yourself? Because if that's the case, you're doomed to lead a pretty miserable life, because reality is not changing. Now, that doesn't mean there are certain social circumstances that we can't all work together to change. But if you're running smack into certain baseline realities, such as some people are smarter and some people are not as smart, and some people earn more money and some people earn less money, and you're living in a free society, and you're running into reality. Like I made a bunch of bad decisions in my life, and now I'm poorer than I otherwise would be. Or I made a bunch
of those decisions.
Because of those decisions. That ain't society's fault. Maybe you ought to
not the government's fault.
That's right. Maybe you ought to get your stuff together.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a joke going around that if I were to run for president, my slogan would have been "Solve your own problems," because for every politician, it's I'm going to solve your problems, and this is something I despise on all sides of the aisle. Right? It's one thing to say that I can cite a specific example of somebody who has discriminated against me, done something bad. Here's a specific law that disadvantages me. If you're solutions focused, then you should be asking, okay, what is the problem and what is the solution? But I think that we as a country and just generally human beings, we're oriented toward being problem focused, meaning that something bad happens and we think, okay, how can we complain about this problem? How can we blame this problem on somebody who's not me? As opposed to, okay, how can we solve this problem? How can we
take ownership? Yeah.
How can we do something about it? And my wife and I have a basic rule that this applies in relationships also. So my wife and I have a basic rule that came up very early in our marriage. So my wife was a lovely person, and as my listeners know, a doctor. She is she does a thing that I think many women do, and she will want to talk to me about a problem. And as a man, my first instinct is, okay, here's what we should do.
Let's fix it, yeah.
And she gets pissed, right? Because she doesn't actually want the problem solved. She just wants to talk to me about the problem because it makes her feel better. Why can't you listen more? Why can't? And so I said to her, that's fine, but I need to know up front in the conversation, is this a problem-solving conversation?
Right.
Or is this a me hearing you conversation?
Yes, tell me so you understand.
Right, so this is an actual rule in our house. So that when we start addressing a problem, I'll say to her, and she doesn't get offended because she's awesome, I'll say to her, is this a you want me to give you a solution problem, or is this a you just want me to listen to you? And very often she'll say, I just want you to listen.
Great.
It's like, okay, good, now I know. Because what's the worst for guys is you say, right, so here's the problem, and here's 3 ways you can solve it. She's like, what are you talking about? Why are you? So I think that's true in politics also.
Yeah.
We mix up what it is that we want out of our politicians. We pretend that what we want out of our politicians is solutions. What we actually want out of our politicians is sympathy.